Hello, everybody. My name is Station Command, and I'm here with Kai's Corner Productions and Showverse to do a few episodes on my personal favorite topic in the world, and that is tabletop role-playing games. And we're going to start off really simple. We're going to start off with the basic history and a little bit of the dialogue around Dungeons and Dragons. Um, which has gained massive popularity recently, thanks in no small part to Matt Mercer and his group of wonderful, fun, nerdy voice actors. Thank you, Critical Role, Vox Machina, The Mighty Nine, whatever. You guys have done some amazing things for D&D and for nerd culture as a whole. But we're going to rewind this all the way back to the mid-70s. With Gary Gygax and his group of friends. They used to play war games, which is where you've got massive selections of miniature soldiers, and you say, "Oh, I'm the French and I'm the British, and we're gonna fight at Waterloo." And you've got your soldiers statted out so that you know what you got to hit, so on and so forth. And you play. I got into wargaming through Warhammer 40K. I have also played several other wargaming games that I quite enjoy, but that's a story for another time. Wargaming is still alive and well today. But Gygax and company wanted to tell the stories of the soldiers, of the adventurers, of the individual. So they got to thinking, how can we do this? How can we put together stories about the individual? And so they developed the precursor to Dungeons and Dragons. Now, there's several precursors and several things that it went through before it reached Dungeons and Dragons, but in 74, they formed TSR, and then they released Dungeons and Dragons First Edition. And they tweaked it and they worked on it and they took it out to conventions and they took it out to game stores and comic stores, and it found a lot of traction. Shortly thereafter, Gygax reached out to various studios and he got the Dungeons and Dragons cartoon produced. After that, he left to try and concentrate more on movies and stuff, trying to get Dungeons and Dragons made into a movie, which so far hasn't worked out particularly well. Hopefully Chris Pine's offering goes a little bit better than the previous ones, knock on wood. But then they came out with Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, which was massively successful. So successful and so penetrative into culture that the Satanic Panic happened. A bunch of Christian parents who were obsessed with, WASP stuff, heard the dungeon master is making my children do satanic rituals and stuff and do what he wants, to which I respond, you know a dungeon master who can get his players to do exactly what he wants? What? Can he teach me? But that went on for the better part of 2 decades, actually. AD&D and AD&D 2E lasted from 77, was in print from 77 to 95. That is 3 years short of, or 2 years short of 2 decades. There are people who have gotten into D&D thanks to Mercer and crew who aren't quite 2 decades old. All right. Well, and then shortly after 95, or right around 95, Wizards of the Coast, which at the time, I don't actually know if they were a Hasbro company yet. I think they were. I think either they just recently been purchased by Hasbro or they were about to be. No, they hadn't been purchased by Hasbro yet because Hasbro hadn't really done its big thing. But WotC, Wizards of the Coast, purchased the intellectual property of Dungeons and Dragons, and they tooled around with it for about 5 years, and then they put out 3rd edition, which while being a separate edition was mechanically more of a tweak to second AD&D 2E. It was more AD&D 2.9 point whatever, it was a more of a successor than an evolution. That isn't the right terminology, but we'll hash that out in the podcast. But that only lasted for about 3 years before they tweaked it again and released Dungeons and Dragons 3.5 in 2003, which is hilariously the year I got into it. I got into it almost exactly the same time that it came out. My first book was actually the Dungeon Master Guide in it would have been October, because Mom got them for me and my little brother for his birthday in mid-October. And we sat down and we played and we had a blast. Or no, it was Grams that got him for us for his birthday. And we had a blast. And I've been game mastering ever since. I no longer use the term dungeon master because I play so many games that don't involve dungeons that game master just makes more sense. But 3.5 had a weird thing about it culturally within the subculture, in that because it was only really a tweak of AD&D, it felt much older than it was. It was only, at when they stopped producing it was 2008. It had only been around, including third, for 8 years. But because it had a lot of the older generation of players, I'm going to call them old heads. It had the old heads into it and in love with it, who had been playing since the 70s and making house rules and making homebrew since the 70s. It felt like it was older than that. It felt like it was 30 years old, because the culture surrounding it and all of the information and all of the community around it was so old and had been playing for so long. And it was fully embraced by these old heads. So much so that I think at one point 3.5 had the title of most third-party products made for it of any publication in the world, any item, any hobby, anything in the world. Like, I don't even think Cars had as many third-party things, like individual model cars, like not cars in general, but like, Plymouths and whatever. It had the most third-party publications for it of any publication ever. I have a friend who owns every English published 3.5 book ever published. He spends a not small amount on storage for them. We won't talk about what they did to his house. We will talk about it in the podcast, but not in this episode, because I'm trying to keep this brief and short. I'm trying to keep this about 15 minutes. But now we're going to talk about how that cultural phenom of it being fully embraced by the old heads meant that 4th edition was, to use unpleasant language, 4th edition was fucked. There was no way that they were going to put out something in 4th edition that wasn't going to struggle. 3.5 was selling good, but by 2008, Hasbro had purchased Wizards of the Coast. I know they hadn't purchased Wizards of the Coast. No, I don't know that. I don't know that they had purchased Wizards of the Coast by the time Wizards of the Coast purchased D&D. I do know they had purchased them by 2008. But because 3.5 was so embraced and ingrained in the gaming community, whatever 4th edition was going to struggle. It was going to have a fight. It had to please the old heads, and it had to be welcoming to new guys or new players. And that's a big order to say, hey, I need to produce something that's going to keep the interest of these people who have been interested for 30 to 40 years and welcome new players. That's a big order. Like, we just have to acknowledge that. And that's a challenge. And 4th edition wasn't it. fourth edition, wasn't it? Fourth edition tried to integrate MMORPG style mechanics into D&D in such a way, in the ability, the thing, I forget the term for them. I only played like 8 games of 5th edition. I DM'd one and it was miserable. It was terrible. But I'll talk about that in just a second. And the way that the abilities worked is you hit them, they were up for so long, and then they'd have a cooldown, just like in various MMOs and various PC games. The problem with that, and here's where I'm going to talk about my GMing experience. Combat in a tabletop game in D&D is made most fun when it is engaging and quick. If it is sloggy, if it takes a whole lot of time to get through even like the most basic of combat, it's for one of, if it's because of dice, if it's because you keep rolling shit, the Wizards of the Coast and Hasbro can't control that. That's on us. That's on the DM and the player. But when it's because of a mechanical reason, that's where it's a problem. And it was a huge mechanical issue, because you had to keep up with so much for the NPCs, for the PCs, and then the players had to keep up with all of their stuff. And it was a slog. 4 turns took the better part of a 3-hour session. 4 turns. If you had a 4-person party and anything more than 2 NPCs they were fighting, it took forever. Like, and not because of rolls, like because of the mechanics. You could be rolling greats. You could be hitting solid 15 pluses on all of your rolls. And it was exhaustively long because you had so much to keep track of. And I'll talk more about what I think makes for good GMing and what makes a good experience for the player as a GM later. But mechanically, 4th edition did not follow what I think of as good mechanics for a game, to make an enjoyable experience for the player. Because that's really what it's about mechanically, is trying to make the experience fun. And 4th edition wasn't it. 4th edition wasn't it. And because it wasn't it, a lot of the 3.5 players were like, nah, it's not for me. I'm gonna keep playing 3.5. I've got the books already. Why am I gonna buy these new books that I went to the game store and I sat down and I tried to play it with the demo guy, and it was a slog. It was unfun. And so you didn't have it. You maybe had 3 old heads in the store, and the entirety of the people who came to the store. And so when a new player was like, hey, I want to try this, and the old heads were like, no, don't do that. Come buy 3.5 books. You can get them for cheaper because they're used and it's more fun. Well, of course, the sales were, going to use choice language again, fucking abysmal. I've seen Hasbro's numbers from those years, and it was awful. It was terrible. I'm half surprised they didn't kill D&D right there. Like, it was so bad. It about killed the D&D branch of Wizards of the Coast. It did. I would be surprised if people weren't threatened with job loss or outright fired for it. But an interesting thing was happening there, because, and this is before the release of 4th edition, shortly before, a group of game designers, some of whom had worked for Wizards of the Coast, were like, hey, a lot of the mechanics and publications of 3.5 are now in the public domain, so we can make our own game. We can make our own game that's very similar to what we've been working on and what other people have been playing, and we can just make it. And they did, and it's called Pathfinder, and it's a very fun game. If you are a critter, you know that before transitioning to 5th edition for the broadcast, they played the crit crew played Pathfinder. Pathfinder has a lot to offer. It is very much so a spiritual successor to D&D 3.5. Second edition, we'll talk more about that in later episodes. But second, Pathfinder recently came out with its second edition, and it's different. But it feels like if they had gone this route for if WotC had done something like this for fourth edition, it wouldn't have been quite so abysmal of a transition. But back to the mothership. Wizards of the Coast rapidly stopped production on fourth edition. It had 2 years of being published. If you have a mint condition first printing of the 4E Player's Handbook, it's actually probably worth more now than it was when it was selling. Like I don't know how to what that's that. And they rapidly got to work trying to build a new system that would accomplish what they were trying to do while also bringing people back. So that fifth edition had a massive challenge. They had to untarnish the legacy of or the reputation. It had to be engaging for new players, and it had to get old heads back. It had to get old heads back. And the way that they were maintaining old heads connection was re-releasing 3.5 in the interim between 2010, when they stopped producing fourth edition, and 2004 or 2014, when they started producing or publishing fifth edition. They were re-releasing the snot out of 3.5 stuff because they were trying to keep a hold of the audience that they had lost through fourth edition. And so fifth edition had somehow even bigger of had a bigger list of things it had to do, but it had a lower bar. Because fourth edition was so abysmal. It was just unpleasant. Fifth edition had to, like I said, it had to untarnish the reputation of D&D. It had to actually get new people in there in the seats at the table. It had to get the old heads back. And it had to be welcoming. It had to be welcoming to both new players and old players. It had to feel familiar to 3.5 players, but not be 3.5. It had to be welcoming to new players, but also be welcoming to established players. Sorry. And that's a big order. That's a tall order. And it hit it. It hit it. It lost, or it left a lot of the complexities of 3.5 in the past, because 3.5 was very tweakable. You could dial in your character to do very specific, very badass things. The numbers you could reach through power gaming in 3.5 and thus Pathfinder were massive. There are numbers that my mid-level, my like 10, 12, 10th level 3.5 characters could hit that my 20 level 5 edition characters can't hit. And that's because of the amount of tweakability. It's nothing against 5e. It's just 5e exchanged some of that tweakability for accessibility, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with being accessible to new players, because as those new players grow and evolve, they can homebrew stuff in. They can homebrew some of the tweakability in if they so desire. That's the fact that they felt the need to publish that you can homebrew stuff in Tasha's Guide to Everything is kind of almost insulting to those of us who are here from the old days, but I get that newer players might feel limited and thus need to be told, hey, you can go play. You can go do some weird shit. Go do some weird shit, dude. That's what the game's for. But yeah. So 2014, they published 5th edition. A lot of people liked the advantage disadvantage system. That was what they traded a lot of the tweakability for, is advantage and disadvantage. Instead of getting +2, +2, +2, +2, +5 for whatever abilities you've got disadvantage or advantage, or giving your opponents disadvantage or advantage. And that's, or an extra attack, or this, that, or the other. And that works. That works very well. My personal favorite is with barbarians with reckless. I've just completely forgot the name of that rule, reckless rage or whatever, where you get advantage and you get an extra attack, but or maybe you get an extra attack, and then they get advantage when they swing you. And it's fun because it's very flavorful. That's another aspect, is it's very in flavor frequently, and I like that. And then 2017 happened, and a group of players, a group of nerdy voice actors, were contacted by their friends at Geek and Sundry, which at this point had mostly been selling board game, or making people board game envious, myself included. We won't talk about how much Will Wheaton got me to purchase board games. And if you have not watched The Guild, which is another one of their productions, what the fuck are you doing? Go watch The Guild now. Go. Pause this video, open another window, go watch The Guild. You will. It hasn't aged as well as you would hope, but that's because comedy doesn't age well. Like, it just doesn't. But it is very good. It stars Felicia Day. It stars some other things, and it's nerds poking fun at herself, and that's what it should be. And through that channel, as I said, Geek and Sundry reached out to Matt Mercer and his group of friends and was like, hey, would you like to play your game on live internet broadcast? And Matt Mercer and friends were like, maybe. Can we do it for 4 or 5 hours at a time? And they said, yeah. And they put it on Twitch, and it blew the fuck up. It blew up. It crushed anything expected of it. They transitioned to 5e, probably because Geek and Sundry had been purchased out by a major conglomerate, and they are somehow linked to Hasbro, and that's that. And 5th edition has never been able to publish enough content to keep up with the demand. The demand is super high thanks to Matt Mercer and company, and it's amazing, and it's grown this hobby hugely. And now I'm going to talk about what I want to do with this experience, with my episodes. I want to introduce you wonderful players who, some of you have been in it as long as I have, some of you have been in it longer, and a lot of you have been in it only because of Matt Mercer. Well, not necessarily only because of Matt Mercer, but in no small part thanks to Matt Mercer. And I want to introduce you to all of these amazing tabletop role-playing systems out there. And I want to talk about them with you so that you feel confident to go to your play group and go, hey guys, I know we've been really having fun with this campaign, but I want to try Mouse Guard. I have the book over there. I don't know why I held my hands up and didn't go get it. I should do that. Next time I'll do that. I want to play Vampires the Masquerade. I want to play the Dresden Files. Pick a system, because there's all sorts of amazing systems, and I'm going to do a dive into them with each of my episodes, both the Showverse episodes and the podcast episodes. And I really hope you guys join me, and I really hope that I pique your interest in some of these amazing systems, because there are some truly amazing systems. Once I'm done covering some of the really great systems out there, I'm also going to go into some of the independent publications for them, not or including just homebrew mechanics, such as the wheelchair that everybody has been losing their shit about, because that woman is awesome. I've been following her for years on Twitter, and I love her to death. And the fact that Matt Mercer and crew got that wheelchair and put it on their show is fantastic. So we're going to talk about all that stuff, and I hope you come along on this adventure with me. Thanks. Hey, thanks for watching that video. Clicking all those YouTube buttons makes it so you see more content from myself and the other amazing creators at Kai's Corner Productions.
All donations help us produce more stuff like that for you. Hope to see you around, you amazing person, you.